Mark Thompson, a 35-year-old software engineer and a CMU graduate from Pittsburgh, has an incredible story to share. Living in Pittsburgh, places like the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia were his escape. At least once a month he would pack up his car, load it with camping gear, and disappear into the woods for a few days. That fall, Spruce Knob Lake was calling his name. He'd heard it was like something out of a postcard, and he was itching to see it for himself. After some online research, he plotted his trip and hit the road on a Friday afternoon. His trusty Subaru was packed to the brim. Before diving into the woods, Mark stopped by the ranger station. They gave him a map and a friendly warning about bears. Mark knew the drill: keep your food locked up tight. With that, he was off, eager to lose himself in the wilderness. The forest was in its full glory. The leaves were a fiery mix of red, orange, and yellow. The air was crisp and clean. After hiking for a while, Mark found the perfect campsite, a sunny spot near a small brook. He set up camp, gathered firewood, and made a simple dinner. As night fell, the woods transformed into a world of shadows. Mark loved the quiet. He sat by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and sketching the trees. But then, something was off. The usual nighttime sounds, crickets, owls, even the distant hoot of a car, had gone completely silent. It was eerie. A twig snapped in the distance. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He strained to see in the darkness, his flashlight beam cutting through the night. Nothing. Just the wind in the leaves. He told himself it was probably a deer or a raccoon, but he wasn't totally sold on it. Hours passed and the silence became almost deafening. Mark started to feel on edge. He'd heard stories about strange happenings in the woods, but he'd never felt afraid. Now, as he huddled in his sleeping bag, he wasn't so sure. He grabbed his flashlight and peered out of the tent. The beam cut through the darkness. Back and forth he looked, and eventually, there was a reflection behind the trees, revealing a pair of glowing eyes. They were huge, and they were getting closer by the second. Fear turned his blood to ice as a massive shape emerged from the shadows. It was tall, very tall, and covered in dark, matted fur. It moved freakishly fluidly. This wasn't a bear. He was hoping it was. But it was something else entirely. Mark had seen documentaries about Bigfoot, but they'd always seemed like fantasy. Now, here it was, standing a few yards away from one. He was sure of it. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body did not react. The creature was closer now, its form emerging from the inky blackness. He could now assess that it stood at least 7 feet tall, its body covered in a dense, dark coat of fur. Its arms hung low, almost to its knees, and its hands seemed disproportionately large. Its face was a haunting blend of human and ape, with deep-set, glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. Its nose was flat, almost non-existent, and its mouth was wide and lipless, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth. A low growl rumbled in its chest, sending vibrations through the ground. The creature took another step, and Mark could see its breath fogging in the cold night air. The smell that wafted towards him was a mix of wet earth, decay, and something horrid that made his skin crawl. He could feel the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. As it drew closer, Mark noticed details he hadn't seen before. Its feet were enormous, with long, curved toes. Its nails were like claws, and they seemed to grip the ground with unnatural strength. Its body was hunched, as if it was perpetually coiled to spring. A cold dread washed over Mark. This wasn't something out of a horror movie that would go away when the movie ended. It was real, and it was standing a few feet away from him. He wanted to run, to scream. He was a sitting duck in the middle of the forest, facing a creature that seemed to belong to another world. The creature then let out another low rumble, sort of like the sound you hear an elephant make. He couldn't help but wonder if it was communicating with others that he couldn't see. Mark could feel the ground vibrating beneath him. It then took a step closer, and for a moment Mark wondered if this was how he would go. What happened next shocked him beyond belief. He heard another rumble, the same type of sound but from further away. And just as he expected more to show up, the creature in front of him turned and ran off towards the sound. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Mark lay there, shaking uncontrollably. He didn't dare move, and all he could think was that the morning light couldn't come soon enough. When dawn finally broke, Mark cautiously emerged from his tent. The forest looked normal enough, but he knew it wasn't safe. He packed up his campsite as quickly as possible, knowing that he had to get out of there. As he drove away, he glanced in the rearview mirror. He half expected to see a group of the creatures watching him. His body then shivered, not from cold but from fear. He knew he'd never forget that night. But of course, that's the understatement of the century. And he wondered if he'd ever be able to sleep in the woods again, if his weekend trips were ruined forever. Back home, Mark tried to return to his normal life, but thoughts of the creature kept triggering him. He even needed to take a few days off just to get his head back on straight. Luckily, his best friend believes the whole thing, but he desperately is reaching out to us for additional support. So, let's help him out. What do you think he should do next to help himself? Officer Mike Callahan had been with the Fayetteville Police Department's K-9 unit for over 5 years, but nothing could have prepared him for the events that unfolded on that chilly October night in 2019. It was just past midnight when Callahan and his German Shepherd partner, Rex, responded to a call about suspicious activity near the Cape Fear River Trail. As they arrived at the trailhead, Callahan immediately sensed something was off. The air felt thick and heavy, and an eerie silence blanketed the area. He unclipped Rex from his lead, giving the command to search. The dog's training kicked in, and he began methodically sweeping the area, nose to the ground. Suddenly, Rex's head snapped up, his ears perked forward. Before Callahan could react, the dog bolted into the dense undergrowth lining the trail. The officer called out, but Rex was already out of sight, his barks growing fainter as he pursued something unseen in the darkness. Callahan radioed for backup and set off after his partner, flashlight in hand. He followed the sound of Rex's barks, which seemed to be moving at an unnaturally fast pace through the wooded area. After what felt like an eternity of crashing through bushes and dodging low-hanging branches, Callahan emerged into a small clearing near the river's edge. There, in the beam of his flashlight, he saw Rex. The dog was standing rigid, hackles raised, emitting a low, continuous growl. Callahan's eyes followed Rex's gaze to a large, gnarled cypress tree at the water's edge. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, a movement caught his eye. Crouched in the lower branches of the cypress, partially obscured by Spanish moss, was a creature unlike anything Callahan had ever encountered. It was roughly the size of a large dog, but its body was sleek and elongated, almost serpentine. Its skin appeared to be covered in fine, iridescent scales that shimmered in the flashlight beam. The creature's head was triangular, with large, luminous eyes that reflected green in the light. As Callahan stood frozen in shock, the creature let out a high-pitched, warbling cry. Rex lunged forward, barking furiously, but the officer managed to grab his collar just in time. The creature's cry was cut short as it suddenly leapt from the tree, sailing over their heads with surprising agility. It landed with a splash in the murky waters of the Cape Fear River and disappeared beneath the surface. As the creature disappeared beneath the murky waters of the Cape Fear River, Rex's behavior shifted dramatically. The German Shepherd, usually calm and composed after a chase, remained in a state of high alert. His ears were pricked forward, muscles tense, and eyes fixed intently on the spot where the creature had vanished. Rex paced back and forth along the riverbank, emitting a series of growls interspersed with sharp, agitated barks. Officer Callahan had never seen his partner so unsettled after an encounter. Despite Callahan's attempts to calm him with familiar commands, Rex refused to stand down. The dog repeatedly tried to enter the water, only to be held back by his handler. He remained fixated on the river, his behavior a mix of aggression and what Callahan could only describe as anger. It was clear that whatever Rex had encountered had left a lasting impression on the highly trained police dog. Callahan and Rex stood at the river's edge for several long moments, scanning the water for any sign of the creature. But the river remained still and dark, offering no clues as to what they had just witnessed. When backup arrived minutes later, Callahan struggled to put into words what he and Rex had encountered. The other officers searched the area, but found no evidence of anything that matched the description of a strange lizard-like creature. The only tangible proof of the encounter was a series of unusual, three-toed tracks in the mud near the cypress tree, which quickly began to fade as a light rain started to fall. As per protocol, Callahan filed a detailed report of the incident, but it was met with skepticism from his superiors. Additionally, he found himself facing an unexpected challenge: widespread skepticism from the Fayetteville community. Despite his years of service and reputation for honesty, many residents and even some of his colleagues struggled to believe his account of the strange creature. He's not even sure how the information was leaked from the station reports. However, while many seemed to be wary of believing his truth, others in the community came forward with their own stories of strange sightings along the river. Many approached him when they were alone, so as not to reveal their own sightings to anyone else. To this day, Officer Callahan remains convinced of what he saw that night, especially after all of the support he received. Even if it was unofficial, he and Rex continue to patrol the Cape Fear River Trail, since he is determined not to let the creature get the best of him. They are both always on alert for any sign of the mysterious creature, in hopes that someday they will be vindicated. I'm a local ER doctor, and I'm constantly at the hospital working day and night. Honestly, I see strange things all the time, but I have to shrug it off and keep working. However, there was one experience that will always haunt me. If you'd ask me publicly if I believe in anything that hasn't been proven with science, I'd say no. But your channel has given me an opportunity to talk about something that has had me deeply confused for a long time. I was checking on a patient who was experiencing chronic headaches. She kept chanting that they were in control. I had the nurse administer her some pain meds and recommended she be sent to the psych ward. She had no opposition to her recommended treatment, but was adamant that she didn't want to be left alone. When I asked her who they were, she told me that they were reptile demons, and that they were going to harvest her soul if she wasn't careful. She said that they had been tormenting her for years, and that she had been trying to fight them off, but they were too strong. I tried to comfort her and assure her that we would take care of her, but she pleaded with me to not leave her alone. I spoke with the nurses, and we decided to keep a close eye on her and have someone always stay close to her. We also increased her pain medication to help ease her symptoms. I kept in touch with her over the next few days, and she seemed to be improving a lot. She wasn't as agitated and was starting to relax a bit. The nurses reported that she hadn't been having any strange or out-of-the-ordinary hallucinations recently. She even started to develop some relationships with some of the other patients in the psych ward. It's possible that whatever was causing her headaches was also causing the hallucinations, but without further testing, we couldn't say for sure. I advised her to continue taking the pain medication and to let the nurse know if she started experiencing any more hallucinations or if her headaches worsened. One day, as I was walking by her room, I saw these menacing shadows on the wall next to her bed. I stopped dead in my tracks and walked backwards to confirm what I was seeing. What I saw next still gives me chills to this day. A lizard creature looked me right in the eyes. It was almost 7 feet tall, and its skin looked scaly and shiny. It had huge claws and these yellow cat-like eyes that seemed to pierce my soul. I tried to run, but it felt like my feet were glued to the floor. The last thing I remember before passing out was its forked tongue flicking in and out of its mouth. When I came to, the nurses were gathered around my bed with concerned looks on their faces. They asked me what happened, and all I could do was tell them to check on that patient's room. A security guard later explained to me that the patient was nowhere to be found, and her sheets were ripped to pieces and covered in blood. We never saw or heard from that patient again, and we had to call her family and explain that she had left the building, and we were actively looking for her. To this day, the family is still searching for her, but my intuition tells me that nobody will ever see her again. Did the reptile demon succeed in harvesting her soul? The skeptic in me wants to say that she lost her mind, scratched herself furiously, ran out of the hospital, and killed herself somewhere. But my intuition tells me that the reality is downright unexplainable. I keep trying to tell myself that I simply saw the reptile demon, because my patient had mentioned it earlier, and I hallucinated. I keep trying to tell myself that I worked too many hours, saw some things that weren't there, and collapsed from exhaustion. But that's not at all how I experienced it, and I can still make out every detail of the lizard creature. I haven't even told my wife that this happened to me, and I really thought I was going to take this experience to my grave. My nephew showed me an episode of your show on YouTube, and that's why I'm writing to you today. At the very least, this was an even that can't be explained with logic or science. Do I think there are aliens out there, a Bigfoot in the woods, and an afterlife? I still say no, as there is insufficient evidence for all the above. Do I think there are lizard people roaming around pulling the government strings? Absolutely not. It simply sounds too absurd and made up. Do reptilians exist in any capacity? No, the only reptiles are simply that, reptiles. Did I see a lizard creature in my patient's room? Undeniably, yes. That's why it bothers me so much even today. Everything I know and believe tells me that what I saw, I shouldn't have seen. But I remember it like it was yesterday. And now when people share their paranormal experiences, my ears perk up. I feel it necessary to include that I'm not on any medication and wasn't on any at the time of my encounter with what my patient referred to as a reptile demon. I hadn't seen anything like that before this event and haven't seen anything that out of the ordinary since. I don't expect to see anything this strange ever again, but the hospital has never felt the same to me since. My patients are always sharing the craziest stories with me of what goes on in their rooms, and I want to share my experience with them and let them know they aren't crazy. I never will though. If I was in the hospital and my doctor said he saw a 7-foot lizard creature in my room, I wouldn't hesitate to find another doctor. Maybe someday we'll be able to share our personal experiences and not live in fear of what others might think. Until then, I'll keep listening to your channel with conflicting emotions and try to keep an open mind. I was not planning on skiing that particular run, the day this all happened. And looking back, I really wished I hadn't. We were in Park City, Utah, and I had skied the other side of the mountain several times already, and I thought it was much better. But my friend wanted to try this one, so I gave in and joined him. It was our last day on the slopes, so I figured why not then to try out something new. Overall, the vacation had been great. Great powder and beautiful weather. I had already passed several other people skiing that day that were out enjoying themselves, and the mood on the mountain was really positive. Everything seemed to be all around perfect. Then, after another hour or so, I saw something in the distance, off to the side of the mountain. At first, I looked over and saw something moving quickly along the edge of the trees. I could not make out what it was, but I knew that something wasn't right about it. It didn't move like someone on skis at all. So I motioned with my pole for my friend to look over, but I don't think he knew what I was trying to tell him, and he just continued down the mountain. So I just continued too, but kept thinking about what in the world I could have seen. And then, even though we were now much further down the mountain, I spotted the thing again near a small cliff. This time I could tell that it was definitely a dog of some sort. It seemed very large and had a scruffy coat, but what was more off-putting than its size was the head shape and the snout. The ears were also too tall for a normal dog. Something just wasn't right, and it was freaking me out. It was clear to me that it had stayed hidden in the woods and had been watching us ski by, occasionally darting in and out of sight. It had obviously been following us for about 15 minutes when I decided to somehow get a closer look. I stopped skiing and slowly made my way over to the edge to see if it would show itself again. But I didn't want to get too far away. I wanted to stay safely in the visual of other people. Finally, I realized that I had gotten myself within 20 feet of the creature, and I realized it when it charged out of the woods at me. I was positive now that it was not a normal dog, and so I tried skiing away as fast as I could. Unfortunately, this activated the creature, so to speak, and it chased me as I skied off down the mountain. I wish that it would have just let me ski by, but for some reason it didn't, and the only thing I could think about was getting away from it. I mean, this thing showed absolutely no fear in chasing me down the mountain, and it was fast. Even in the deep snow, there was nothing I could do to stop it. I pushed myself to go faster than was comfortable, and just when my legs were feeling like they were giving out, I came across some other skiers and skied up to them. I started to quickly try and explain the situation and what had happened, but the look on their faces told me that I should just stop. And anyway, the creature had disappeared somehow by this point, which really did make me look crazy. So I continued down, expecting to stop skiing for the day. When I got to the bottom, my friend was waiting for me, but I think he realized that something was definitely wrong. He could tell from the look in my eyes. I told him I was ending for the day and agreed to come back with me. We went back to our hotel, but I couldn't get what I saw out of my head. I also couldn't get the words out to tell him what had happened. He seemed to get it through because he basically left me alone and didn't ask any questions. It wasn't until later when I Googled it that I found out that there had been other reports in the same area at around the same time. I wish I would have known, but in a way, I'm also glad I didn't. I don't know what to think about this encounter, and sometimes I don't even want to think about it at all. But if anything, I hope that bringing it back into my consciousness can help me understand what has happened. I'm not sure if I will ever want to talk about it or even think about it too often, but I feel like writing it out here right now, and that has helped me take control of the situation in some way. I hope that someday soon these events can make sense to me. But for now, all I know is that I encountered a dog man, and I'm still 100% scared.